Why did Keir Starmer appoint Peter Mandelson as US ambassador? Today we'll get documents which shed light on that decision. How much did the Prime Minister know about Lord Mandelson's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein? Hello, I'm Vicky Young and welcome to Politics Live. Joining me for the first part of the programme today, Labour MP Polly Billington, Conservative MP Bradley Thomas and entrepreneur Richard Farley. And our political correspondent Nick Eardley joins us to tell us what to expect from the Mandelson files. Also on today's programme. The US blows up 16 Iranian mine-laying ships in an effort to combat disruption to shipping. How the war in the Middle East is having a direct impact on energy prices here.
That heating oil that was quoted £350 for 3 weeks ago on Friday had gone up to £540. How can anyone justify this?
The Home Secretary bans Saturday's Al-Quds march, seen as supportive of the Iranian regime. Is it a sensible measure to prevent disorder or an affront to free speech? Elon Musk's wealth almost doubles in a year and $4 trillion is added to the net worth of billionaires. Is that a cause for celebration or concern? And this is the scene in Downing Street where Keir Starmer will soon leave for Prime Minister's Questions. We'll bring you that live at noon. And we want to hear from you. If you have any thoughts on those stories or questions for our panel, we want to hear your voice. You can get in touch using the details on screen now. We look forward to hearing from you. Well, the first batch of documents relating to the appointment of Lord Peter Mandelson as US ambassador will be released later today. There's a lot of expectation in Westminster around all of this, and we're joined by our political correspondent Nick Eardley to tell us what we can expect from this, because it will be a limited release of documents, won't it?
Limited, but a lot. We've been told it'll be a chunky file that we get after Prime Minister's Questions. It will be largely, we think, about the process leading up to Lord Mandelson getting the US ambassador job. So some of the vetting. We do know there's some stuff that the Met have asked the government not to publish because they think it might impact on their police investigation. So it's quite plausible that by the end of the day, we don't have the complete information, even if we have more. But nevertheless, Vicky, look, I mean, it's an important moment. We don't normally see this stuff. The government was forced into a position where it had to publish it. It's going to give us more of a sense of what went on behind the scenes. And I suppose the key question is, does it prove what the Prime Minister told Parliament, that Lord Mandelson repeatedly lied, in the Prime Minister's words, about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? Or, as Lord Mandelson believes, does it show that he answered questions truthfully? And
really, this all goes down to questions about the judgment of the Prime Minister, doesn't it? Because it's all about how much he knew about that friendship when he appointed Peter Mandelson, because it was a controversial appointment, wasn't it?
It was controversial because it was public knowledge that Lord Mandelson had had a friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. The case the Prime Minister's always made is that he sacked Lord Mandelson when it became clear the extent of that friendship, and that Lord Mandelson had made out that he barely knew Jeffrey Epstein when he was going through the appointment process. The big question is whether any of these documents give that sense, that actually Lord Mandelson didn't come up with everything he could have, and that the Prime Minister made a decision with incomplete information. There's also the question about whether he should have asked more. One of the documents we don't think we're going to see is one where Number 10 is said to have probed some of Lord Mandelson's questions a bit further. But yes, a lot to wade through when we get those documents early afternoon.
OK, and we will see you after Prime Minister's Questions as well. Polly, this is a moment of jeopardy for the Prime Minister, isn't it? Because it's about his judgment.
Well, I think what we've got is an element of transparency that I think everybody would value about the way that these decisions are made. And I know myself and many other colleagues are relieved that we have that kind of transparency, notwithstanding the fact that the Intelligence and Security Committee are the ones who are making a lot of the decisions about what is released. And, of course, it needs to be protecting the police investigations. But ultimately, what a lot of us have said is that we need to make sure that these processes, when appointments are made, are as transparent as possible before the fact rather than after them. A lot of this stuff, as Nick said, was in the public domain. So that also goes to a matter of whether people, whether men in particular who are in decision-making roles, think that behaviour such as Epstein's is acceptable or worth the risk. Being associated with something like that is deemed worth the risk.
A convicted paedophile, of course.
And that, yes, exactly. And so that's why many of us are saying we need to have pre-appointment scrutiny by select committees as a baseline statutory situation for any political appointments when it comes to ambassadorships, and indeed for other significant appointments, because otherwise these kind of decisions are made behind closed doors amongst people who do think, oh, talent or connections is more important than behaviour or character.
Bradley, do you think that actually the government is going to be more transparent than any's been before?
Well, look, firstly, this is still a question about the Prime Minister's judgment. We know that Keir Starmer has tried in the past to make a virtue of the fact he's very forensic, but he appeared not to have asked very many questions of Mandelson, despite knowing the risks associated with his appointment, despite him having been sacked from, Blair's government on 2 occasions. But the reason we've got to this point of transparency today is because of the work of Kemi Badenoch and the Conservative Party in Parliament, calling for that humble address that forced the government's hand because they knew there was a risk of a rebellion. If it hadn't been for those actions, the relentless pursuit of this by the Conservatives in Parliament, we wouldn't be facing this situation today where documents are about to be released. So Keir Starmer is definitely not out of the woods yet, and the question around his judgment remains and probably will continue to remain for some time. OK,
well, we will bring you any developments on all of that as it happens in the next 90 minutes or so. Now, let's move on to talk about the latest developments in the US-Israeli war with Iran and what it could mean for energy bills here at home. Take a look at this post from Donald Trump, posting on Truth Social. He says he's pleased to report that within the last few hours we have hit and completely destroyed 10 inactive mine-laying boats and/or ships, with more to follow. Now, overnight, US Central Command released this footage. What it says are several Iranian naval vessels being destroyed by US attacks. They said the targets eliminated yesterday included 16 mine-laying boats near the Strait of Hormuz, a vital shipping route, of course, through which around 20% of the world's oil and gas supply passes. And take a look at this headline from the paper, talking about energy bills here, saying they have soared by £300 in a week as the cost of war hits UK homes. Richard, as an entrepreneur, in terms of the impact of this war on energy bills and on industry, on businesses, how serious do you think it is?
It's very serious. It hits the ordinary consumer very hard, as we've just seen by those numbers. So it's going to affect the whole economy. Something like that, it happened in the 1970s, a big oil shock. Whether it's going to be permanent or not is obviously a big question. It's very hard to predict what's going to happen in that war right now. But the trouble is, when something like that happens, it just makes everybody poorer. It's not any redistribution of wealth. It's basically a tax on the entire UK economy. And so it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt someone, and there's no easy way out of it. I mean, energy, a couple of people here who have energy experience, it's incredibly complicated for the ordinary person to understand the UK's reliance on importing energy. So it's very hard to know about what policy to adopt, whether the zero is right or wrong, whether we should be nuclear. It's a hugely complicated, and the trouble is that the decisions are very long term. It's not like you can turn it around even in the life of this parliament. So I guess the big question is whether the government steps in on times like this, like they do in foreign countries, and rather than hitting the consumer for that £300, the government absorbs it into their general spending. I suppose that's a political question. But otherwise, it's unequivocally bad for the UK consumer and UK business.
Well, Polly, on that point, you used to advise Ed Miliband, who is now the Energy Secretary. I mean, what is the government doing to mitigate this? And do you think they should step in? And it's happened before, stepping in on energy bills.
Well, I was going to say, the last oil shock wasn't back in the 70s when I was at primary school. It was 4 years ago. And we are now, the level of global uncertainty and instability we've got gives a more case for us increasing our resilience, increasing our energy independence and security, and weaning ourselves off fossil fuels. You know, because we know that fossil fuels and the gas price and the oil price are dictated by dictators and petrostates. So the less reliance we've got on them, and the more we are generating our own electricity and energy at home, the better. For now, for people at home who are worried about those price rises, the energy price cap will be in place until July, and that needs to reassure people that we've got that in place. And I know that, for example, people are really worried about oil, those people who are relying on heating oil, who are off-grid. The important thing that Ed Miliband has done is pointed out that he's referred this to the CMA, the Competition and Markets Authority, because there's some genuine concerns about the nature of that market, where people end up being locked into only one provider. People tend to be in really remote places. There'll be one or two providers in one place, and therefore they get locked into prices. That's not fair, and so we need to make sure that Competition and Markets Authority can properly investigate that and see whether there are other ways that we can protect people in those situations.
Bradley, what would your party do to reduce the pressure on?
Well, look, there's a few points here. So under this government, regardless of the state of what's going on in the Middle East and the impact that's having on bills have gone up. Energy bills have gone up under this government, not come down as they promised. For a very long time to come, the UK is still going to be dependent on fossil fuels, regardless of whether the government pursues its transition over the short term or the long term. We've heard that from the Climate Change Committee, and the government is effectively shutting down further supply that goes into a commodity-based market by not allowing further drilling in the North Sea. We would like to see more drilling in the North Sea to increase the global supply, because that has an impact on prices as well. The government needs to abandon the absurdity of its cliff edge net zero policies, because they are effectively making the UK poorer and deindustrialising. But on the point of heating oil that was specifically referred to, I've had constituents get in touch about this. They're rightly concerned because heating oil prices have gone up by about 108% since the end of February. I signed a letter to the Competition and Markets Authority calling for them to take action where necessary. So if the government...
So you think the market's not working?
Well, we know that there are monopolies in certain parts of the country because there are limited companies that supply, and that means that people are exposed to some of these shocks. But one of the best things the government can do in the short and medium term is ensure that the UK isn't turning off our own taps and becoming increasingly dependent on imports.
Polly, and then I'll bring
Polly's going to make a point here about net zero, but this is an ideological point. The Labour Party are wedded to this. They're not interested in sort of a transition that respects UK industry and UK consumers. They are pursuing this purity at any cost, and UK consumers are getting poorer as a result.
Polly?
That's an ideological point. The amount of gas and oil in the North Sea is 0.7% of global supplies. It would make no difference to the price. It's not like we get a special first dibs or a British discount for that oil and gas. We know, and you know, because you're on the select committee with me, that we are holding the government to account. Yeah, but it doesn't make any difference to the price. Yes, it doesn't make any difference to the price.
Where do you
0.7% of
in a global
reserves.
economy, scarcity causes
an increase in cost.
Any difference
of course,
to the price.
Right, Richard,
we should be weaning ourselves off that gas price.
Increase supply to reduce scarcity.
It will not be.
Let's make a difference.
To be fair, you're making a very good point. It's a global price. So whether the UK increases it by a couple of percent, it takes a long time to do that anyway. But whether you increase it, it's a global price, and you can't ultimately shelter the entire economy. You can redistribute the pain, but you can't shelter the entire economy. It's a small drop in the ocean for the total global supply, so it won't really affect the price. The big issue, I suppose, is it's just demonstrating the vulnerability that the UK has. If we did come to a hot war in this area of the world, we are very vulnerable. Extremely vulnerable. So that's a security issue. But in terms of economics, I think I support you, because it's not going to make any difference.
Well, I mean, we've got less gas storage because of decisions that the Tory government made.
Let Bradley answer that point.
In a commodity-based market, scarcity causes prices to increase. So it's lunacy for us as a country to turn off the taps for a resource that is on our doorstep within UK sort of geography.
But the point is, would it actually help?
It wouldn't make any difference
if it doesn't make actually a massive difference.
It won't move the global price.
It would feed into the supply, and that matters. But the other thing that the government needs to do is adopt some of the policies that we've put forwards around our Clean Power Plan to move where some of the green levies sit, because that would enable energy bills to come down by around 20% at a time when consumers are hurting and businesses are hurting and the government is allowing the UK to be deindustrialised.
We have already shifted
answer.
£150 off energy bills onto taxation for exactly
Probably
the reason
energy
that you're
bills
talking
are up
about.
under this
and we
government.
can do that
Energy
because
bills
we
are
have
up.
understood that the important
Energy
thing is to
bills
be
are
able
up.
to make sure that and 150 will feed into people's bills. Now, I know these things are difficult because of what's happening at the moment, which is why we need to build our resilience.
Energy bills are up under this government,
all of your
Polly.
proposals would actually expose this country to more international shocks rather than less. They're not going to contribute to more global security. You're just talking about a declining field which would not make a difference to the oil price globally.
This is the detachment from reality that we see time and
It's
time
really
again
not. We're
from the Labour
creating
Party.
jobs. We're
We live in a parallel
reducing costs of renewable energy, which is
So what
lower
about the
and lower
what about
and
the
lower.
thousands of jobs being lost in the oil industry in the UK? Last year we lost a third of our refining capacity. in part because of decisions from this
because you
government.
come
Polly answer, you've asked her a question.
You know, because you're on the same committee as me, about how important it is that we shift those jobs into the renewable sector in the North Sea, because that is the way that the future is. What
The
you're
government is
talking about
actively
is
choosing to
investing in the stables when everyone else is driving a car. It's so backwards.
No, it's lunacy, Polly.
Richard, in terms of the price for industrial energy, it is very high, isn't it, here compared to other countries? How much of a disincentive is that for companies to invest here, do you
Well, I think it's I'm no expert on data centres, but it's a big obviously that's a huge growing industry. So that's one of the biggest costs involved in data management is electricity. So that has a massive effect. But everybody uses electricity. I suppose, and it means that heavy industry, it means the UK, it obviously affects heavy industry more than, say, services. So it does mean that there's a shift offshore. It's another tax on doing, any form of industry production here.
We have actually increased the discount for energy-intensive industries for precisely this reason, including ceramics and cement, because we know how important those industries are, and we have got a really high energy cost for those industries, and that's important. But we also need to be supporting them to be able to shift, because while they continue to be dependent on those fossil fuels, these kind of price shocks have a long-term effect on loads of industries across our country,
Do you know what would be
and
great?
therefore communities
Do you know what would
and
be
jobs.
great if the two of you guys, your two parties, sat down, and because nothing's going to be solved in the next 2 years, unfortunately, sat down, a bipartisan committee, and said, OK, where's energy going?
It's almost like we have one of those, and Bradley and I are both on that, and we come up with a set of recommendations.
Is it nuclear? Is it OK? It may be pointless putting more and more money into oil like it was putting into coal, 20 years ago.
Well,
so
that's their
it might be
obsession, not
the
ours.
right way. But unfortunately, we've had two wars, which have been a shock to us, which weren't expected. So, but it'd be nice to sit down, the two parties. It shouldn't be political, and say, how do we, this is a 10-year, 15-year.
Well, to be honest,
problem.
Richard, one of the reasons why we're in a better place now, and I will admit this, that the long-term investment in renewable energy has been for a long time a certain amount of consensus. That's what's so disappointing about what the Tories are doing now, because they've broken that consensus. The offshore wind industry that we've got now didn't happen by magic. It happened because big decisions were made more than 10 years ago, and the Tory government and the coalition government chose to agree with it, and now you're breaking that consensus.
One at a time, Richard, what was your question to Bradley?
Would you agree that the wind and the non-carbon generator has been a success?
Well, look, the point that we challenge is the pace at which we're sort of going about this and the effect that net zero is having on...
You do think it's the future, do
look,
you?
it's going to be part of the energy mix. Of course it is. Renewables are part of the energy mix. But we're talking about the pace that this is delivered. So what about the days when, in the winter, the wind isn't blowing? If we have a massively high dependency on renewables where we're not able to generate energy, that exposes us. So regardless of whether we like it or not, a long-term acknowledgement of the role that oil and gas and fossil fuels plays is effectively an insurance policy.
It would be much better to be forward-looking and look at the new technologies that give us the opportunity to store in different ways from oil and gas.
Energy storage does not generate electricity,
It stores it and therefore enables us to use it when otherwise we wouldn't have it.
And to generate...
That's the kind of thing that we need a smarter grid.
OK, one at a time. One at a time. Don't talk over each
I need
other.
to come back on this. To generate energy storage capacity, that means the government would want to do things such as put battery storage all over countryside. We're seeing instances of this come up. We have to acknowledge the reality of the world that we live in. So if you were to say, take Ukraine as a great example, minus 27 temperatures at night, 600,000 people without energy. They're having to burn furniture because of lack of access to energy. If we were in a position where we were dependent exclusively on renewables, there will be times where the power will go out. We have to acknowledge that fossil fuels...
OK, Polly, just quickly answer, because I've got another person person I
for
want
the
to hear
future.
from.
Well, what I'm saying is that you build up that resilience in a range of ways, including with new forms of
But this government
technology,
wants a cliff
including
edge,
storage.
Polly.
No, we do
This
not
government
want
is
this.
pursuing
We
a
are
cliff edge.
pursuing something which
A third
is
of
about
our
the
refining
future
capacity
rather than the
lost
past.
Let Polly answer.
No, it's about the future, not the past. And unfortunately,
It's about
Bradley,
reality.
is
Let
no,
Polly
you're
answer.
stuck in the past and you're thinking that the only solutions are the ones that have previously been there. The national grid is literally 100 years old. It was built for when we had coal and gas-fired power stations. Now we need to be making sure that that grid is smart enough to be able to use the electricity that we generate on offshore and onshore and on solar.
Right, I want to hear from a viewer now. Sorry, I'm going to have to
past.
stop you
Parallel
both
universe.
arguing for a second because I want to hear from Ronnie. Ronnie Livingston is in Bangor in Northern Ireland, 68-year-old, and he has sent us this message.
3 weeks ago, my wife got a quote for 500 litres of home heating oil for her 90-year-old mother. That heating oil that was quoted £350 for 3 weeks ago on Friday had gone up to £540. How can anyone justify this?
Polly, what do you say to Ronnie?
I know that's absolutely heartbreaking for Ronnie and his family, and does go to the conversation we were having a bit earlier about how heating oil and that market needs to be properly examined by the Competition and Markets Authority. It's been like that for far too long. I know when I was working at Citizens Advice over 10 years ago, we had concerns about this. So this isn't a new problem. I think we also need to recognise that people who are reliant on heating oil also live in leaky and drafty houses. So we need to be supporting them. And that's one of the things that the government's got with its Warm Homes Plan, focusing on ensuring that people have better energy efficiency so they're less reliant on that heating oil, as well as supporting them to be able to get off that kind of fuel, which again is really exposed. It means that they are really exposed to these kind of global shocks.
Bradley, it is a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
lots
where
of
you've
people
got these often quite localised or regional monopolies of supply, and we've seen instances of alleged price gouging in the last few days, that's something that the government and the Competition and Markets Authority should be looking at, and if necessary, they should take action because people should not be exploited because of a scarcity of supply and because of local monopolies.
OK, we're going to talk about something else now. Take a look at this headline from Forbes magazine. It's talking about the fact that it's their 40th annual World's Billionaires list. It shows that Elon Musk is the world's richest person ever recorded. It says that there are 3,428 billionaires across the globe. Let's look at three of the most famous. You can see one of them here. This is Elon Musk, of course. He owns the social media site X, electric car company Tesla and SpaceX. His wealth has increased by just shy of $500 billion to $836 billion. Then there is Jeff Bezos. He's the owner, of course, of Amazon. He comes in at number 4 with $227 billion of wealth. And Mark Zuckerberg, who is the owner of Meta. He is the 5th richest man with a wealth of $224 billion. Well, joining us for this part of the discussion, I'm pleased to say, is Jeremy Corbyn, who is the newly elected parliamentary leader of your party. Thank you very much indeed for coming in today. 55 billionaires from the UK in the latest list. Is it a good thing or a bad thing?
Terrible. And they're growing up each year, the number of them. And the number of global billionaires is growing up. Global inequality is rising. Here we are, 21st century, 25% of the world's population are hungry and short of food. They're not all starving, but they're short of food with no guarantee of being able to live properly. Inequality is rising, homelessness is rising, absolute poverty is rising, and we have a tax system that actually encourages the growth of the billionaire class. And so this isn't recent. This has gone on for probably ever since the sort of neoliberal economics took over with Reagan and Thatcher, and it's been a progression. And the Oxfam report on this is quite devastating. Can't we just look at the world on the needs of people rather than extolling the wonders of these billionaires?
OK. Richard, is it a good or a bad thing?
Well, I would have voted for Jeremy a few years ago. Ironically, I think the inequality of wealth is absolutely terrible, some very basic problems. The price of when I was growing up in the 80s, the price of a home was 4 times average salary, and now it's 8 to 10 to 11. So that's terrible if you want to buy a home. It used to be the dream for a young person. Graduate or any type of employment, for youth employment, is terrible. You go and get a law degree, you do whatever, you get an apprenticeship. It's still very hard to get a job. So the dream for young people is really dying. I've got 2 kids in their 20s. They've both gone to Australia to work. So I have a lot of sympathy. And I came through the care system myself. I spent time in an orphanage. I'm from the left, would be my natural situation. However,
what's the
however, and I think it's admirable, your position. However, we've seen the experiment, and call it simply the Soviet Union if you want. They tried it for 50 years, where you really, unfortunately, it doesn't encourage anyone. It just discourages people. And we might talk about Elon Musk, how terrible he has this wealth. But on the other hand, he's put all these satellites in the sky. He's put Teslas on the streets. He's created things, and that having those things, having satellites makes us all richer, makes us all better off. Having his cars makes us all better off. There's a period where there'll be a terrible inequality, which he will make more money, unbelievable amounts of money. But if you discourage that, if you discourage people creating things, then unfortunately they don't get created. So it'd be fine. You'll get rid of the billionaires, but no one else will be poor because no one will be creating businesses and creating jobs. So unfortunately, we've seen it in practice. We've seen wealth taxes tried by lots of countries and abandoned because they don't work. So unfortunately, the problem's there, but I don't see that being the solution.
Jeremy?
Underfunding of public services, underfunding of health, underfunding of social security, terrible levels of inequality. And all these billionaires, one day they all need a hospital, one day they all need a fire service, one day they all need a paramedic. Who provides that? But the rest of us who pay our taxes in the proper way. So we have these ludicrous tax havens around the world that the billionaires thrive from, and these unbelievable levels of wealth of individuals. You quote the Soviet Union. Well, it's gone for quite a long time. It had many problems. I wasn't totally enamoured of everything there, but they did at least provide housing and work. But then look at the Scandinavian countries that do not have these levels of inequality, do have a very high quality of life and a high level of public services. So it can be done. But we also have the global inequality between the southern countries and the industrialised North America and Europe, which also has to be closed. What we're doing is just worshipping billionaires at the expense of the needs of millions.
Polly, are we worshipping billionaires, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I certainly not. That bunch of blokes looked like something out of Succession and made me feel slightly ill. Look, you might think that it's great about the satellites, and obviously it's important for us to be able to get electric vehicles on the streets. But Elon Musk has basically bought himself a platform in order to be able to spew hate across the world. So I think there are other aspects.
We're playing the man now. We're not playing the system. We're talking about billionaires in general.
Well, yeah, but
billionaires in general. Wealth creation.
If you can't spot what those 3 guys have got in common, then I think that's quite interesting in and of itself.
But I'd love them to come here. I'd love them to come here, spend a lot on VAT, buy property, pay stamp duty.
I'm very happy.
People. I'd love them to be here.
I'm very happy that we have put taxes on private jets, which will make a difference to them, private schools, that will probably make a difference then if they've got kids, and private equity. We've also increased the council tax for properties over £2 million. £2 million worth of property. Now, I know what you're talking about with the London market, and it makes it very difficult for people to get on the market, on the ladder. At the other end, people have got houses of that value. Making sure that we get money into the exchequer so that people with the broadest shoulders are paying towards the things that we all rely on, including the roads and the hospitals and the schools. That is a good thing to do.
You're right about getting money in. But what you're not counting is the money that's not coming in and the money that's never going to come in.
Do you know what?
And the
People of this country will pay their taxes.
When I moved here, I wouldn't move here now. I'm Australian. I wouldn't move here now because of the tax regime. There's a hatred of success. Right? The story is not being told.
I don't think that's true, Richard.
And also, there are people leaving.
Let's just say why.
The people leaving aren't counted, but the opportunity cost of people not coming. Elon Musk won't move here. You don't want him, but any other successful entrepreneur is not going to move here right now. I guarantee it. I guarantee it.
Jeremy, the hatred of success.
Business confidence is up. Investment in this country is up. That's not true, Richard.
It would have been up anyway.
It's fine if you don't want to come, but seriously.
Why do you say there's no hatred of success?
People admire those that achieve a great deal. Doctors, scientists, writers, artists,
But not
musicians.
billionaires.
But not entrepreneurs.
They don't necessarily admire people who sole virtue appears
So if I
to be
start a business,
the ability to make a great deal of
Jeremy,
money
if
for
I start a
themselves.
business and fail, that's okay. But if I start a business, hell, if I succeed.
Well, so
Well, hang on, let
If
Bradley
you start a
come in.
business and pay people properly and create jobs and pay taxes properly,
They do.
That's not a big problem.
They do.
But the problem we do have is we have a taxation system that actually makes it very easy for you exponentially to grow when you
What are the
become
loopholes in
quite
Can you tell me
wealthy.
about the loopholes? I'd actually use What are the
Bradley,
loopholes?
I want Bradley's view on billionaires.
I mean, in many ways, this is quite surreal. I've heard sort of a almost defensive sort of communism in the Soviet Union here. I've heard, a parallel universe where business confidence is allegedly
It is up. And we've got investment up in this country.
And that's the absolute
after the chaos
opposite
you.
of what businesses across my constituency are telling me. But let's just acknowledge two realities. So one is that at the minute in this country, it's the top 10% of earners that pay around 60% of the taxes. And those who are particularly wealthy, who have put something on the line to create a success of their business, whether it's a small business, large business, they are often highly mobile. And if other jurisdictions and other countries have more lucrative tax arrangements, don't be surprised if they leave. The UK is a country that should not be afraid of saying, we want to support those who want to get on in life. And instead, what we've seen under this government is increased welfare dependency and those who want to take risks and create wealth feeling that actually they're stigmatised and they have other options to go elsewhere.
Holly, what do you say to that?
Well, I would say patriotic people pay their taxes. And I know that we need to be ensuring and encouraging entrepreneurs, which is exactly what we need in my community. But it's not about people making billions and billions. People mostly who are entrepreneurs, and this is where I would definitely part company with Jeremy, want to be able to do something that gives them meaning in their lives and earn enough money to be able to live. Those are the entrepreneurs that we can be supporting. And then if people are earning excess, I mean, how many swimming pools does a billionaire need? I think they might as well put that money into...
Who are we talking about? This is some fictitious
No,
billionaire
it's not. It's
living...
literally
Where are
those-
these people?
those three
Most
people
of
that
the
were
people
listed
you're
on
affecting
there.
are entrepreneurs trying to make $1 million. They're not
talking-
trying to make $1 billion.
I
They're
know,
trying
we're
to start a
talking about
business.
billionaires'
They're all
welfare.
in the US.
We're talking about...
Have you noticed where
and
all
you
they
know
are?
what?
But
think
what
some
about
are
the
here.
ordinary?
Digital
What about the
services
ordinary
tax. We put the
entrepreneur
digital
starting a business,
services
taking
tax.
a lot of risk? 9 out of 10 fail. They take the risk. If they're lucky enough to make some money, you want to hammer them even more. They pay capital gains tax and income tax, and they spend it and they pay VAT. I mean, and then they pay inheritance tax.
I'm
They're
very,
lucky.
very happy.
They're lucky if their
I'm
kids see a dime.
very
If their
happy
kids
for us
see a
to be
dime.
encouraging those entrepreneurs.
Right,
But
let's-
It doesn't sound
billionaires
like it.
who've
It doesn't
got some
sound like it.
spare
I haven't seen it by this
cash,
government.
what you're talking about with people with spare cash, like billionaires, should be paying their taxes.
I just see people leaving.
Jeremy, do you think this government is doing enough to tax wealth?
No, I don't.
What would you like them to do?
I would like to look at a wealth tax, which would help.
Even though, as we've said, that lots of other countries have
Well,
tried it and it doesn't seem to have worked.
Yeah, give it a go and see what we can do on it. But also look at the issue of global taxation levels, because your point about people transiting around the world looking for a lower tax regime.
So there's tax havens, which you said people are using. So
Which-
wouldn't they just go and do that?
Well, how about moving into some more global agreements on levels of corporation tax, which some development has happened on? How about moving into some agreement on taxation levels around the world so that you don't end up with loads of money being placed in the Cayman Islands, the Virgin Islands and so on? And how about people actually pay their way in taxation around the world rather than put it somewhere else? If you give the poorest people a pay rise by raising minimum wage, raising living wage, you give public sector workers a pay rise, all of that money is spent in the local and national economy. If you give a tax break to billionaires on the basis that they might, if they feel like it, invest something within our society, the rest of it doesn't go into the local economy, it goes somewhere else. And so I think we need to think about how we need to grow our own society and our own economy.
OK, I just want to ask you a couple of questions about your party, which you've become the parliamentary leader of. I mean, it's taken a while to get to the position
It has
where
taken
you've
a while,
been
yes.
appointed.
It's been a long process. It's been
Have
fascinating.
you been a bit worried about how that's sort of started off on the wrong foot, would you say?
Well, yes. I mean, there isn't a book that's yet been written about how to form a political party, but I'm now in a position to write one.
OK. And how is the relationship between you and Zara Sultana, who's obviously a former Labour MP as well?
We've both been elected to the National Organising Committee of the party, and obviously we're now developing policy areas. I'm particularly looking at policy areas on the poverty of people with disabilities within our society, and so we'll be quite quickly developing policy platforms on a lot of areas.
But you're doing that together. I mean, it's
obviously,
you and Zara together. Do you cooperate? Do you work on these things together?
It's not just us two. There's 24 people on this committee.
But do you work particularly? Do you speak to her often? Is it a joint enterprise?
It's an enterprise of the entire committee and the party membership.
Do you think that's maybe why it takes so long to get things done?
Yes. Democracy is sometimes a slow-moving ship.
OK, and what would you like to be, what would you hope to achieve, say, in the short term?
In the short term, we'll be working with and supporting different independent groups around the country that are running for election in local authorities. We'll be working with them. And then over the next year, we'll be developing the local branches. Well, that's already beginning to happen, local branch of the party. But all of them have to be steeped in working within and being active in and part of the local community. It's not just an electoral machine we're developing.
But on talking about elections, because they are important in the end,
of course
aren't they? I mean, in terms of, there are people who are worried about you're all vying for the same votes potentially, you and the Greens maybe. Would you be willing to do some kind of agreement with them to maximise the vote?
I strongly supported the Green campaign in the recent by-election in Gorton and Denton, and we would be obviously in discussion with them. We are not the same party, we're not the same organisation, we don't necessarily have identical aims and everything. I think we are probably stronger on international issues than they are, for example. But yes, of course, there's discussions all the time at a local as well as a national level.
OK, have a look at this headline, the BBC headline, which is talking about the Al-Quds Day March, saying that the march organised by an Iran-linked group has been banned after a police request. So the Met Police has asked the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, and she's made that decision, which she says was aimed at preventing serious public disorder. It's an annual event. It's been seen as some as being pro-Iranian. I think first launched in 1979. Jeremy, they've decided, because of the risk of serious public disorder, to ban this march. Do you think that's the right decision?
I feel very worried whenever I hear about public demonstrations and marches being banned, because it is a restriction on our free speech. This country would very quickly condemn any other country that started banning public protest, even Iran or elsewhere. It doesn't mean that there hasn't and should be very strong discussions between the police and the organisers of the march, proper stewarding of it and proper agreements. I've been involved in many marches.
Have you been on this one before?
I've been on a demonstration of it many years ago, but not this particular march, no. But I do think banning demonstrations is something that makes me worried, because I want to live in a society where people can freely express their opinions. Obviously, crucially, it's got to be peaceful and got to be respectful. OK,
Polly, do you think this is the right decision?
Yeah, I do, actually. I don't think our free speech is absolute. It's always qualified by making sure that we ensure public safety and ensure that people around and about do not feel that they're being targeted in any way. And I think that, you know, these decisions are not easy to make. This is one that the Metropolitan Police was also involved in. And quite often, I think people sort of underestimate quite how some of these protests can make other people feel. And I do think some people say, well, you know, tough, you know, you've got, there's no right not to be offended. But it is actually about public safety, and therefore, reluctantly, because I think free speech is important and protest is important, sometimes we have to make these decisions.
Bradley?
I would support that. I think the Home Secretary, she's made the right decision. This is a group that was founded in Iran, that when they last had a demonstration in London, there were reports of serious violence and hatred being stirred up. The price of freedom is responsibility. That's responsibility in terms of, you know, how we conduct ourselves and the meaning and the impact of our actions. And I know that, you know, on advice from the police, a decision like this wouldn't have been taken lightly, but I think it's the right one.
Jeremy, do you think that sometimes it can tip into hatred?
I think you have to. Hatred is appalling, and obviously people have got to feel safe in their communities. That's why I think there has to be a high level of engagement between the police and the organisers of marches. Now, I've been involved with Stop the War Coalition and Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and we have a lot of discussions with the police before the marches take place. And sometimes there's not always agreement at those meetings, but usually we get to a place where there is accommodation and people can work together. That's important, because the police also got a lot of criticism for what they did in Birmingham over Maccabi Tel Aviv. I think the criticism of the police was actually very unfair, but let's park that for the moment. The fact is the police made that decision and got a lot of criticism for preventing things taking place, and now it's the other way around.
This demonstration is in support of the Iranian regime. Think about what it's like being an Iranian dissident who lives in this city.
It's Al-Quds Day. Let's be clear what it is.
It's backed by the Iranian regime. Think about what it's like for people who have fled that appalling regime and are living in London to have people basically saying that the Ayatollah is a good person on our streets in Britain. Now, I know that we believe in free speech and I know we believe in the freedom of protest, but we also need to think about what the implications are for people who come to this country to seek sanctuary when the risk is that protest legitimises a set of views and a regime that ultimately is counter to a lot of the values that we share in this country.
Aren't you moving there into the realms of political censorship of a march? I mean, I'm not here to defend the Iranian government. I'm not here to defend the Ayatollah. I'm not here to defend the lack of human rights in Iran. But I do think we need to think very carefully about the direction of travel of our society on increasing restrictions on public activities and public demonstrations. Obviously, I'm with you. I'm with you on the question. I'm totally with you on the question of safety. Can I finish a minute? I'm totally with you on the question of the safety of the community and the public and respect for all religious institutions.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, freedom of speech versus and also not to forget that there are service people heading that direction right now who might be asked to put their lives on the line, meanwhile back home. But where do you draw the line? Not to be emotional about it, but would you have let in 1938, would you let the Nazis have a protest? Where does free speech stop?
In 1936, my mum was there at Cable Street opposing the fascists marching through the East End of London. In the 70s, I organised demonstrations against the National Front march. No, it's not an absolute. Of course it isn't. And so a judgment has to be made somewhere. I'm just concerned at the direction of travel of our society on
Jeremy,
things.
sorry, because we have to go to the House of Commons. Thank you very much for coming in. And I'd like to welcome viewers joining us on BBC News as we look at the House of Commons ahead of Prime Minister's questions, which we will bring you at noon today. Keir Starmer, of course, up against Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, with a lot going on, including, of course, a lot of volatility in the Middle East, which we will be discussing. Polly, I presume the Middle East and events in the Middle East will be probably what dominates a lot of what goes on in the chamber today.
Yes, I think so. There's been
criticism of Keir Starmer as well.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is we are in an extremely volatile global situation, and that makes all of our conversations in Parliament extremely important because we have to maintain the right kind of tone about the support for our troops and people who are defending our citizens and indeed our interests in the Middle East, and maintaining our principles about British values and what we think is the right thing to do. Because I think there's been a little bit too much of a kind of gung-ho approach from some political parties, when actually what we need to do is make sure that we are doing the right thing by British citizens and the right thing by our values.
Do you think the government's doing the right thing by British citizens?
Look, I think there are lots of areas where the government has made wrong judgment calls. I think when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East, the Prime Minister is walking a very fine line, particularly after the Gorton and Denton by-election, because he's now at the in hoc to his parliamentary Labour Party.
But do you think he should have joined the initial bombing of Iran alongside Israel and America?
Well, look, the point we've made is that where there have been instances that the UK should take offensive action to defend UK assets and interests abroad, we think the UK should do that. But the Prime Minister, in reality, after the by-election a few weeks ago, he is in hoc to his parliamentary Labour Party that are calling the shots.
I think that's completely wrong. Keir Starmer has always been very clear about the importance of international law, and he has rightly made the judgment that what we should be doing is defending our interests and defending British citizens when those people have been put under attack because of the Iranian regime's response to an offensive by Israel and the United States. The idea that we should just go gung-ho
Nobody has said that about
well,
going gung-ho.
I think that is actually what you've been talking about, is suggesting that we should have been going in with the US and Israel.
Polly, some of the criticism was
wrong.
about deploying. For example, we can see pictures here of HMS Dragon, which left Portsmouth yesterday evening. It's the British Type 45 destroyer heading to the Eastern Mediterranean. But also people say it's a bit late to be doing this.
Well, look, there'll be lots of things that we're doing that we can't talk about, and you can't get photographs on the television about. Sending HMS Dragon there is important, but it's also about the drones. The fact that we've been taking out Iranian drones who have been threatening our interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. Those are important things that we need to happen. But we can't be talking about everything that we're doing. And certainly, Kemi suggesting that troops are hanging about, not doing anything, is really offensive to our troops.
She was making the point that the government has dithered and delayed.
We have not been doing that. We have been making sure that we're protecting our interests and protecting our citizens.
And I know for a fact that Kemi has utmost respect for our servicemen.
I think there's a real politic here. I mean, I don't think it was going to put many lives at risk. I think it's really would just be ticking the box for the United States.
We're just going to the House of Commons now for Prime Minister's questions.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our armed forces are working day and night to protect British lives and British interests in the Middle East. The RAF have flown over 230 hours of defensive operations over multiple countries, shooting down multiple drones, protecting British lives and our allies. We thank them for their courage and for their professionalism. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Prime Minister, strengthening Britain's defence capability and rebuilding our industrial base has never been more important. Can the government's £1 billion helicopter investment with Leonardo UK support skilled jobs across the UK, including Tata Steel in Wensfield and My Supply Chains in Wolverhampton North East, where we are immensely proud of our Black Country steel and manufacturing heritage? And will the Prime Minister ask relevant ministers to meet me to discuss securing more of those good jobs in Wolverhampton and Willenhall?
Prime Minister. I can thank my honourable friend and very happy to arrange the meeting that she is asking for. Our £1 billion investment in new helicopters is good news for steelmakers in her constituency and secures thousands of jobs across the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, we're making defence an engine for growth. Jobs building helicopters, new Typhoons in the northwest, new frigates, creating a decade of shipbuilding on the Clyde. A Labour government investing in our armed forces.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Benno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why does the Prime Minister think now is the right time to increase the cost of petrol?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are not increasing the cost of petrol. We're absolutely clear in taking the measures that are necessary to deal with the impact of the conflict in Iran. We're dealing with that with other allies. We're taking the necessary action. But the best thing that we can do, Mr. Speaker, is to work with others to de-escalate the situation. And Mr. Speaker, as I said to the House last week, I took the decision that we should not join the initial US-Israeli offensive against Iran. The Leader of the Opposition attacked me for that decision relentlessly. She said that the UK should have joined the US and Israel in the initial offensive strikes. Mr. Speaker, then yesterday, in the wake of the economic consequences, the Leader of the Opposition totally abandoned her position. She told the BBC, I never said we should join. She told the BBC, I haven't said we should have gone in with the United States. That is the mother of all U-turns on the single most important decision a Prime Minister ever has to take, whether to commit the United Kingdom to war or not.
Mr. Speaker, I think the mother of all U-turns is him saying that they're not increasing fuel duty. That is news to us because last week the Chancellor stood up and said the fuel duty was going to increase in September. The Prime Minister told us at the start of the year that the cost of living was his #1 priority. So can he explain how a rise in fuel duty helps with the cost of living?
Mr. Speaker, fuel duty is frozen. It's going to remain frozen until September, and we will keep the situation under review in light of what's happening in Iran. But, Mr. Speaker, the most important issue is de-escalating the situation. And I come back to the Leader of the Opposition's position because this is one of the most important decisions a Prime Minister or Leader of the Opposition ever has to take, whether to commit your country to war. The day after the initial US-Israeli strike started, her shadow Foreign Secretary said that the US-Israeli initial attacks were absolutely right, and it is a position my party supports. She said, why has the Prime Minister not actually worked with America to be much more proactive? Last Wednesday, Leader of the Opposition. We are in this war whether we like it or not. What is the Prime Minister waiting for? Then yesterday she says, I never said, I know they don't want to hear it. I know they don't. I wouldn't want to hear it if I were them. After all that, she says...
Order. Enough is enough. I can't hear it. Who wants to lead the first ones out? Right, we'll have a little bit more silence. Prime Minister.
So after 9 days of saying, join the war, join the war, join the war, yesterday she says, I never said we should join. I haven't said we should go in with the US. I'll tell you what's happened, Mr. Speaker. She and the Reform leader have been spooked because they realise they've jumped into supporting a war without thinking through the consequences. And now she's furiously trying to backpedal.
The Prime Minister seems to be asking last week's questions. This week, I'm asking about fuel duty. He has said that he wants to help... Mr. Speaker, he has said that he wants to help with the cost of living. My constituents live in a rural area. They rely on their cars to get to the shops, take their kids to school, see their elderly parents. And they tell me the rising cost of petrol is the single biggest cost affecting family finances. So does the Prime Minister not understand how important cars are to people in rural areas, or does he just not care?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're working across all departments and with allies to deal with the impact of the conflict in Iran, as the House would expect. But she says about, if I'd asked her last week, her position would have been, we support the initial strikes and we want to join the war. This week she says, we don't want to join the war. I'm sorry, that is a screeching U-turn. And Mr. Speaker, this is in this job, you don't get a second shot at making the right call on taking your country to war. If she were Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, we would be in the war, and she would be coming back to Parliament a week later to say, oh, sorry, I got that one wrong.
Order. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but unfortunately, we've got to stick to Prime Minister's questions, not opposition questions.
Mr. Speaker, he said if I were Prime Minister, HMS Dragon would have left a week ago. The only time... Mr. Speaker, the only time he's taken decisive action was stopping Andy Burnham from standing in the by-election. But let's talk about what the people out there are worried about. I heard from a builder, Mr. Speaker, who has 115 employees using 75 vans. With the jobs tax, sky-high energy bills, and now a hike in petrol prices, that builder is having sleepless nights. How does the Prime Minister justify a rise in fuel duty to that small business owner and millions more like him up and down the country?
Prime Minister.
There hasn't been a rise. It is frozen. There isn't going. It is frozen until September. And Mr. Speaker, she mentions the HMS Dragon. Can I first start by thanking the Royal Navy who are serving on HMS Dragon? Can I second say that what's been happening is it's been carefully being loaded with the anti-strike ammunition and capability that it needs. And the Navy and civilians have been working 22-hour shifts in relationship. But in relation to those that are taking the action to defend us, what does she say? Just hanging about. Just hanging about. That's how she described our pilots in the region. Let me tell you what they've been doing. Flying sorties in 7 of the 10 countries in the region day and night, taking out incoming strikes, protecting the lives of others whilst risking their own. If she had any decency, she'd get up and she would apologise.
Mr. Speaker. Oh, hang on. I think they should wait for it. Mr. Speaker, I have never criticised our armed forces. I have criticised him.
Order. Mr. Swallow, you're going out. I've had enough. Week in, week out. Either leave or I'll name me.
Mr. Speaker, I have never criticised our armed forces. I am criticising him and his decisions. And let me remind the House, Mr. Speaker, about his record on the armed forces. This is the same man who worked with Phil Shiner, a traitor to this country, who made up evidence to put our soldiers in prison for crimes they didn't commit. That is his record, so I won't take any lectures from him. And by the way, military families are also worried, the ones in this country, about petrol prices. He's got nothing to say on that. And there's another group of people, Mr. Speaker, who have been hammered by this government. Farmers. I spent all last year telling the Prime Minister that his family farms tax was killing British farming. Now, those farmers are being punished with higher fuel prices. Does the Prime Minister think that's fair?
So, Mr. Speaker, no apology to our pilots who are risking their lives. And I'm not going to take lectures from someone who says we should join the war, and a week later says, can I change my mind? I got that wrong. It is deeply embarrassing. And she's not the only one. Mr. Speaker, last week she's not the only one, the leader of Reform. We should be part of this with the US and the Israelis. We have to get rid of the regime. We should do all we can to support the operation. I make that perfectly clear, he said. Until yesterday, screeching U-turn, we shouldn't get ourselves involved in another foreign war. Two parties packed with failed Tories, led by leaders who are not fit to be Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he doesn't want to talk about fuel duty because he has got absolutely no answers. The Conservatives are on the side of farmers. We are also on the side of drivers. We froze fuel duty every year from 2011, and in fact, we cut it in 2022 because we care about the cost of living. Labour think drivers are a cash cow. And now, Mr. Speaker, they think that drivers are a cash cow, and now they're hiking fuel duty for the first time in 15 years. Everyone in this House knows the pattern. First, he'll march his backbenchers up the hill. Then they'll be forced to defend fuel duty rises in the local elections. Then there'll be another humiliating U-turn. So why doesn't the Prime Minister just stand up, admit he's got it wrong again, and scrap the fuel duty hike now?
Mr. Speaker, in the last 2 weeks, I've made two of the most important decisions a Prime Minister can make. The first is that we should not join the war in Iran. The second is we should protect British lives and the British national interest. The leader of the opposition decided that we should join the war against Iran. A week later, that we should not join the war against Iran and to insult our armed forces. She has utterly disqualified herself from ever becoming Prime Minister. Thankfully, she never will.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Prime Minister knows, my mum proudly worked in the pot banks of Burslem and Tunstall and is watching at home right now. Now, tomorrow is International Day of Ceramics, and that matters deeply to Stoke-on-Trent, the historic heart of Britain's ceramic industry. Yes, and Newcastle-under-Lyme. With energy prices rising, again, due to global instability, will the Prime Minister please tell my mum and our fellow Stokies what additional support the government will give energy-intensive industries like ceramics so the kilns of Stoke-on-Trent can fire for generations to come?
He raised a really important issue, and I know that not only will his mum be watching, but his constituents, who he serves very, very well. Our supercharger will significantly reduce costs for thousands of major industries. Eligibility for the scheme is being reviewed this year. I can tell my honourable friend we're working with the ceramics industry on whether the scheme can be extended to more firms. Under the last government, industrial energy prices doubled and over 1,000 jobs were lost in the sector. We will not tolerate that.
Said David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Warrington North for her powerful and courageous speech in the debate on jury trials yesterday. I really hope the Prime Minister was listening. Mr. Speaker, 30 years ago this week, a man carried 4 handguns into Dunblane Primary School and murdered a teacher and 16 children. I was deeply moved by the BBC documentary about it last night and the courage of the parents who campaigned for a ban on handguns to keep other children safe, including Mick North, who lost his 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, on that dark day. He's rightly called on the Honourable Member for Clacton to renounce his description of the handgun ban as, and I quote, ludicrous, something the member still refuses to do. And Mr. North has also called for a review of firearms legislation to close any loopholes. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Prime Minister.
Well, I certainly do, and we must never forget the horror of Dunblane and never forget the young children and their teacher who did not come home from school. The campaign that families fought to make this country a safer place is a lasting legacy, and we should be enormously grateful for their courage.
Sir Ed Davey.
The Prime Minister for his reply, and I hope the government will close any loopholes. Mr. Speaker, this week families across the country have seen petrol prices rise at the pump, mortgage rates go up, and fixed energy deals get more expensive, all because of a war they did not start and do not support. The leader of the Conservatives has been competing with the Honourable Member for Clacton to be Donald Trump's biggest cheerleader. And the Prime Minister was right to reject their costly warmongering. But last week, I asked him to guarantee that energy bills won't rise by hundreds of pounds in July. He didn't answer. So let me try again. Will he give people that energy bill guarantee now?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for raising this, because people will be really worried about the impact on them, and just to reassure households that the cap is in place until the end of June, until July, and therefore that deals with the situation for households there. We are working with the sector and with others and with allies to do everything we can to make sure those energy bills don't rise. So we're working round the clock on that. The most important thing, the most effective thing we can do is to work with our allies to find a way to de-escalate the situation. He's right about the Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of Reform. Last week they were urging us to join, this is serious, to join. If they had been leading the country, we'd be in a war, and they've now come to Parliament to say,
Order. Prime Minister. Who said lying again? I want that withdrawn. I did. Is that withdrawn? And I'll deal with it, thank you. I don't want any more off the front bench. We take it very seriously, and calling another member a liar is not acceptable. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and so that's our position.
Josh Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Too often I hear from SEND families in Hertford and Stortford whose children have been left out of education for months or even years because they can't get a school place that meets their needs within a reasonable distance. I'm campaigning for more investment in the bricks and mortar SEND provision that semi-rural communities like ours need, so families can access support early and easily and their children can thrive in education. So will the Prime Minister back my campaign to expand SEND provision in Hertford and Stortford, and will he arrange a meeting with the relevant minister so we can discuss it in more detail?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's right. Families are crying out for change, and that's why it's really critical we get this right. Our reforms will fix the broken SEND system, where parents have to fight for support, replacing it with tailored support personal to a child's need. A Best Start family hub in every local authority with a dedicated SEND practitioner will help families with face-to-face support they need. My honourable friend's a great advocate on this issue, and I'm happy to make sure he gets the meeting that he's asking for.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, let's be clear. Donald Trump's war in Iran is illegal, and the situation that has unfolded since is verging on insane. Oil is falling from the skies, sewers are exploding, the IRGC is indiscriminately attacking civilians across the region, cargo ships and potentially even mining the Strait of Hormuz, the economic consequences of which will be stark for the global economy, but for every single person living on these isles too. And whether the Prime Minister accepts it or not, he did indeed take us into that war when he allowed the Americans to use UK bases just last week. But I have a specific question. He'll have seen the same footage I have of an American Tomahawk missile landing on a primary school, killing 110 children. Does he believe that to be a war crime?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're all concerned by that footage, but let me be absolutely clear with him. We have 300,000 UK nationals, including Scottish citizens, in the region. Strikes, missiles and drones are being fired into the region, putting them at great danger. We are taking action to protect them. I'm astonished that the SNP says don't take action to support Scottish citizens in the region. It's outrageous.
Peter Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. National Highways, the government-owned company, has reneged on a promise to replace a demolished footbridge at Park Lane West in Netherton. It crossed one of the busiest roads and junctions in Merseyside, used by countless residents, particularly children and parents going to and from infant and primary school. My constituents have requested that that bridge be replaced with no ifs or buts. Will the Prime Minister support my constituents' very reasonable request to honour that promise made by National Highways?
Can I thank him for campaigning for his constituents, his residents, who are obviously concerned about this. As I understand it, National Highways has concluded the best option for all users, pedestrians and cyclists, is a new crossing. But I thank him for raising the points, and I'll be happy for ministers to continue discussing with him the options.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This afternoon, the Mandelson papers, or the first tranche, will be released, bringing into the light for the first time UK institutional knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein and those associated with him. But here in the UK, we have our own Epstein, Mohammed Fayed, and the institutions that supported his crimes. As a co-chair of the APPG for the survivors of Al-Fayed and Harrods, along with the Honourable Member for Lichfield, we welcome the actions of the Metropolitan Police in recent days, but we continue to call on them to describe those crimes as what they were, trafficking. Does the Prime Minister recognise that characterisation, and will he meet with the APPG and survivors to hear their asks?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank you for raising this really important issue? And I discussed it with the Honourable Member for Lichfield last night, particularly the approach of the APPG, and thank her for her important work on this issue. I'm very happy to meet the APPG and the victims. I think it's very important to do so. She'll know there's an ongoing police investigation, but that doesn't mean that we can't have the meeting and listen to those that need to be listened to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Team Derby is our partnership making sure that the billions of pounds in investment that this Labour government is bringing into Derby benefits the people of Derby in regeneration, skills and good jobs. The government's record investment in Rolls-Royce submarines means hundreds of new jobs and apprenticeships in Derby. So will the Prime Minister firmly reject the Green Party's defence policies, which would decimate jobs in Derby and leave the United Kingdom unprotected?
Can I thank her? Derby is part of our industrial heritage and has a bright future. Initiatives, as she says, like Team Derby are so important to strengthen key sectors like defence, creating jobs and growth. Our £9 billion deal with Rolls-Royce to boost our fleet of nuclear submarines is testament to that, creating more than 1,000 jobs and safeguarding 4,000 more. Those that oppose all that must answer to the working people that they claim to represent.
Gagner Mahindra.
The Prime Minister will be happy that I'm not going to ask about fuel duty. Businesses across South West Hertfordshire are telling me they're now reluctant to take on young workers due to this government's rise in employer national insurance contributions and the crippling employment rights bill. With almost 1 million young people now not in employment, education or training, how exactly does the Prime Minister plan to get Great Britain working again?
Mr. Speaker, we're putting in place the youth guarantee, which helps young people into work. It is a serious issue. I would remind him that on their watch, 1 in 8 young people were neither in education, training or work.
Stringer.
Mr. Speaker, the National Audit Office report on Northern Powerhouse Rail, which came out on Monday of this week, surprised none of us in its conclusions that lack of engagement by the Department of Transport with mayoral authorities, local authorities and other involved parties in the north of England was leading to poor programming and lack of investment in the rail system in the north of England. We deserve in the north of England a rail system fit for the 21st century, not the 19th century, which is what it is fit for. Investing in the rail system will enable growth in the north of England, which will benefit the whole of the country. Will the Prime Minister take a personal interest in the slowness of investment in the rail system so that we can have that growth?
Prime Minister. Well, thank you for raising this important point. The party opposite gave nothing but false promises for a decade. We will deliver the biggest transformation of transport in the north for a generation, providing up to £45 billion of funding to deliver. We're taking forward all recommendations from the NAO report. That doesn't change the planning or the trajectory of the project.
Dr. Andrew Morris.
Mr. Speaker, grant cuts and over-optimistic Treasury assumptions on council tax base growth mean that 8 fire stations and 96 retained firefighters across Wiltshire and Dorset face the axe. Would the Prime Minister please facilitate an urgent ministerial meeting for Wiltshire and Dorset MPs to discuss extending the preset flexibility permitted elsewhere at no cost to the Treasury to our fire and rescue service, so its fire stations and its dedicated firefighters can continue to serve our community?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for raising this. I don't know the details in the particular case, but I will make sure that the relevant meeting is set up so that the details can be explored.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Russia's continued assault on Ukraine has devastated its healthcare system. Hospitals are under extreme pressure and their critical shortage of specialist staff to treat the injured. That is why I, along with other British physiotherapists, travelled to Ukraine to train clinicians who are working under unimaginable strain. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking Tanisha Sandhu, Daniel Sim, Kay Joe, Andrew Jaggi for the remarkable work, and will he commit to expanding UK-Ukraine clinical training partnerships?
Yes, I will. And can I pay tribute to her and the rest of the delegation for their commendable work in Kyiv. We recently announced a new package of support for Ukraine, enabling highly skilled British surgeons, nurses and physiotherapists to mentor Ukrainian clinicians treating complex battlefield injuries. Mr. Speaker, on one of my recent trips to Kyiv, I went to one of the hospitals where they were treating the burns of those returning from the front line, and it was humbling to see the work that was being done, and I was extremely proud to know that the UK was helping in treating those who had such awful burns.
Kirsty Black.
Westminster's tax on Scotland's energy is holding back investment, and it's costing thousands of families their livelihoods. After months of refusing to do so, the Chancellor has finally now said she is committed to change. So will the Prime Minister confirm to the House today when the OGPM will be introduced to provide certainty for jobs, certainty for investment and, crucially, certainty for energy security?
Here, here. Prime Minister. Speaker, we all want certainty for energy security, and oil and gas will be part of the mix for many years to come. I'd remind her that 70,000 jobs were lost under the SNP and Conservatives in the last decade. We want energy security. We see new nuclear as part of that energy security, and what the SNP do, they block it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Silently and in semi-secrecy, London and the southeast of England are experiencing the largest mass eviction by a private landlord in decades. Criterion Capital have issued at least 130 no-fault evictions across their portfolio, including in Britannia Point in Collier's Wood in my constituency. Those affected have done nothing wrong. They have paid their rent, looked after their homes and worked hard. They are simply victims of a voracious landlord who always wants more. Will the Prime Minister ensure that in the final weeks before the abolition of no-fault evictions, his government do all they can to hold Criterion Capital to account?
Can I thank her for raising this case? Renters should have security, and I condemn any unfair evictions. I'm proud, Mr. Speaker, to be abolishing Section 21, a practice that's pushed thousands of renters into homelessness. And I'll make sure the Housing Minister looks at the case that she's raised.
Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rural residents in Beverley and Holderness are reeling under the impact of higher fuel prices. Yet 2 days ago, the Chancellor said that in September, fuel duty would go up. So my constituents want to know, as the Leader of the Opposition repeatedly asked, is that fuel duty going to go up in September and add to the misery of my constituents or not? Prime Minister, for once in this place, give the House and the people of this country an answer. Yes or no?
Fuel duty is frozen. It'll be frozen until September. In light of what's happening in Iran, of course we'll look carefully at the situation. But his constituents need to know, and it's right that they know, that it's frozen until September, not fear-marking.
Martin Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The devastating fire on Union Street in Glasgow has destroyed small businesses and an iconic part of the city's heritage. But the exceptional skill and courage of our emergency services prevented an even greater tragedy. We need a rapid, thorough investigation with urgent implementation of recommendations. Local businesses, commuters and residents are already feeling the impact, and recovery must be a shared priority. Will the Prime Minister join me in thanking our emergency services and supporting efforts to rebuild this vital part of Glasgow?
Prime Minister. Can I thank him for raising this devastating incident for Glasgow? My thoughts, and I'm sure everybody's thoughts, are with those who've seen their businesses and their livelihoods destroyed. Can I thank the emergency services who responded so quickly to the situation? And the people of Glasgow have seen far too many historic buildings suffer terrible fires over the last few years. And that's why we're investing to protect heritage buildings in England. But we'll keep a careful eye on the situation that arises.
Stephen Gatlin.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the Welsh Senate, a secret Whitehall memo was called out by its members that showed this government's attitude to devolution, a muscular unionism that Boris Johnson would have been proud of. So can I ask the Prime Minister, when Scottish and Welsh voters go to the polls, will he respect that decision? And furthermore, what is it about those elections that so seems to terrify him at the moment?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm not going to make any apologies for spending more money in Scotland or in Wales to improve people's lives. There's been record investment under this government into Scotland. The question is, where's the money gone, John?
Jane Craft.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week, members from across this House and the other place felt compelled to write to Joe Boydell, the Chief Executive of Travelodge, following reports that in 2022, a man was given a key card and the room number of a woman staying alone in one of their hotels by staff, entered her room and sexually assaulted her. Most alarmingly, statements made by Travelodge implied that staff had acted fully in line with their security and safety protocols and within industry standards. Will the Prime Minister join me in urging Ms Boydell to take us up on our invitation to meet with all interested members of this House and the other place to outline what action Travelodge are urgently taking to meet their duty to safeguard women staying in their hotels?
Can I thank her for raising this absolutely shocking case and for talking to me last night about the details of it. My thoughts are with the victim, who had a right to be safe and who has failed in the most appalling way. Travelodge must take serious action to ensure such an appalling incident can never happen again. I'm concerned at reports that they haven't met members of Parliament. They should do so, and I should add that the Safeguarding Minister wants to meet them as well, and they should do that as well.
Vicky Slade.
There we will leave PMQs, Prime Minister's questions for this week. Lots of questions from the Conservative leader, Kemi Badenoch, about fuel duty and petrol prices. The Prime Minister wanting to talk about events in the Middle East and his response to what's been going on there. Let's introduce my guest for this part of the programme. I'm joined by Luke Pollard, who is the Defence Minister, Claire Coutinho, who is Shadow Energy Secretary, and Nick Eardley, our political correspondent, is back with us. It was quite a weird Prime Minister's questions. It was almost as like there were two different conversations going on. So lots of questions about fuel duty from Kemi Badenoch, but the Prime Minister really wanting to talk about his response really to what's going on in the Middle East.
It's hard not to be struck by how much anger there is in the Commons at the moment when they talk about Iran and the war. But yes, look, there was something the Prime Minister said there that I think is potentially quite significant, talking about the fuel duty increase that's due to come in September in stages. He said that would be kept under review. So I think we're getting a bit of a sense that the government might be open to rethinking that if this conflict continues to have such a big impact on oil prices. As you say, he clearly wanted to talk about the Tory position on whether the UK should join the war. I mean, it does feel like Kemi Badenoch said something at Prime Minister's questions last week that feels quite different from the position she was setting out in the BBC yesterday, because she did say, I've written it down here, she did say that the US has taken offensive action to destroy missile launches to defend British troops. Why is the UK not doing the same? Why would the Prime Minister not allow the RAF to do the same? So clearly the Prime Minister thinks that she's ended up in shaky water there. But yes, I'm not sure we got many answers from either side, really.
No. Let's start with fuel duty, Luke, because as Nick says there, it's under review, because the expectation is there will be a rise in September. So where are we now?
Well, let's be very clear. Fuel duty is frozen. With frozen fuel duty, there'll be no changes in that until September. But as the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have made very clear, because of the events in Iran, we're keeping a focus on the cost of living. We've made it a priority as a government. We'll continue to make it a priority. And as a result, we're monitoring the situation closely. But September is a long time away, and the events in the Middle East are fast changing on a daily basis. So it's right that we keep that under review. It's right that we monitor those situations. But we're going to take the steps necessary to ensure that we're addressing the cost of living. That's why we were reducing energy prices by £117 from the 1st of April. It's right that we've frozen rail fares, prescriptions and fuel duty, and we'll continue to take steps to make sure that people can realise that we've got a government on their side on the cost of living. But September is a very long time away, and so we need to focus on the immediate. And as a Defence Minister, that's focusing on reducing the escalation in the Middle East to make sure that we can continue with the flow of energy to the UK, but also that we're building our energy security, and that's why we're investing in clean, green renewables, so we're in charge of our energy future rather than have it determined by events hundreds of miles away.
Just on petrol prices, we've already seen that they've gone up. I mean, is there a point at which you feel they've gone up so much that is when you have to decide that the fuel duty won't go up in September?
Well, it's right that we look at the cost of living because we know it's a real concern for people. We know
Do you think
that
people can withstand a little bit of a rise?
We know that the events in the Middle East, the American and Israeli actions, are pushing up oil prices. And as a result, there will be a corresponding knock-on onto the price at the pump. That's why the Chancellor said she's monitoring this closely. We need to keep in mind that our focus as government on the cost of living is not just a passing one. We've made it a hallmark of the general election in 2024. We've taken action since then, and we're going to continue doing so. But I think looking ahead to September, when it's frozen today, and fear-mongering around what might happen many, many months ago with a fast-changing situation in the Middle East today, I can understand why the Conservatives are going on that, but we inherited a fuel duty freeze that was coming to an end. And if it weren't for the freezes that we've implemented since coming into office, it would be 8p a litre higher because of what we inherited. Now, we've frozen those duties. Fuel duty is frozen. It will remain frozen until September, but we're keeping a close eye on events.
Claire, the situation is very volatile. Keeping it under review would be, some people say, the right thing to do.
Well, look, let's be clear. Fuel duty has been frozen for 15 years. And what people are experiencing now, people who have to drive their cars to get to school, get to work, are higher petrol prices. And coming down the tracks is the first rise in fuel duty that they've had in 15 years. And it seems to beg a belief that the government can't move quickly enough to say, we know that you're hurting now, and what we're not going to do is hit you twice in September. That's something which is within their gift. And I think it's particularly bizarre for a government which says that it's prioritised cost of living to have done what they've done so far, which is increase energy bills. Luke talked about energy bills coming down. They're still going to be higher than they were at the election. And actually, that's been enormously difficult for people. And not only that, they've made decisions across government, across housing, for example, which is pushing up costs, across food, which is pushing up costs. And you can see that because inflation is higher than it was at the election. We've become an outlier with Europe. Inflation is higher, cost of living is worse. And a smart thing, I think, to do would be to take out that extra hit for all of those drivers who have to use their car that's coming down the tracks in autumn by saying now we won't do that fuel duty
but
rise.
How would you
we
pay for
realise
that?
that's the wrong thing.
It's priced in, isn't it, to the accounts, if you like, the government's accounts. But how would you pay for that?
Well, you've seen that Rachel Reeves has increased spending in all kinds of ways. So, for example,
borrow more?
So, for example, one of the things that we've said is that we shouldn't be doing the two-child benefit cap change that she's made, which is, again, an enormous spending.
Well, I think
it's
you're
about
using that to pay for
billion.
added defence, aren't you? You've already spent that.
But my point is they're going to have an enormous rise in welfare spending. So there are things that you could do to prioritise the cost of living. And the point is, if you're saying, which Keir Starmer did at the beginning of the year, that my priority is cost of living, there are changes that you can make. And I think fuel duty would be a sensible thing to do because it is the exact group of people who are being hit now by higher petrol prices that you could help in the autumn.
It's not till September, is it? So, I mean, prices could come back
But
down
if you think
again.
about an ordinary person who's now paying more at the pump, right? So that person is looking at their petrol budget for the year and they know that they're going to spend more than they expected. So why would you not make the decision now to say we're not going to make that worse? We could actually even out some of that hurt by saying we're not going to do that first rise in fuel duty for 15 years that we thought was the right thing to do. Actually, we're not going to hit you twice. I think that is something that you could do now. And
but
I think
you can admit that it's frozen now, though, can't you? Because of this fear-mongering around this. I understand the politics of why, being weak on the war from a Tory position, you want to go on this. We know cost of living is important, but you could say at the start of every sentence, fuel duty is frozen. Now. It's frozen now, September. Do not worry, folks. We know this is a worrying time, but fuel duty is frozen until September. You could be saying that, but you're choosing not to say that. You're choosing to stoke a concern when people are already worried. That doesn't seem like a responsible way to act in opposition.
So I think that is a completely bizarre bit of distraction. The point is...
But it is frozen now.
The point is... I mean, I'm not denying it's frozen now. I've never said that. The point is people are paying higher prices now. And if you've got a group of people who are suffering and you're telling them there's a tax rise coming down the line, you could take away that tax rise. Why wouldn't you do that? Those people are going to, even if petrol prices come down, those people are going to have paid more for their petrol over the year. Those people are going to have struggled with cost of living. That's the real experience they're facing. So why would you not make the decision now not to make that worse?
Well, I think you've got to look at events. That's why we're keeping them under review.
Even if the petrol prices come down in September, they still would have had a worse year in terms of their petrol costs, right? So that's why you can make the decision now.
Well, fuel duty is frozen now, and I would hope that the Conservatives would be able to add that to every one of these cruelly partisan attacks to stoke division, to say fuel duty is frozen. You don't have to worry, folks. It's fine. No fuel duty until
Luke,
it changes till September.
Do you admit that people are paying more for their petrol now? Do you admit that?
Well, we know because of the actions that the Americans and the Israelis have taken that the price of oil has gone gone up.
Well, then, if you're a normal family, even if the price of petrol comes down later in the year, will they have paid more for their petrol over the year or less?
Well, we know that people are paying more now,
which
and
is
that's why we've frozen fuel duty,
yeah, but
and
this
why
is
we're
my
taking.
Point, which is why you could take the decision now to say, we know you're suffering at the moment, we're not going to make that worse.
Well, we're keeping the situation under review. I realise you want to make part of our tax of something that's many, many, many months away, with a fast-changing situation in Iran, changing by the day. By the way, I understand why you want to distract from Kemi insulting our RAF pilots, saying they're just hanging around. Why you want to distract from being in favour of the war last week and not in favour this week.
We're talking about people and fuel duty. You're talking about partisan political attacks. I think everyone's just seen what you're trying to do in terms of political attacks. The question is, if you care about cost of living, cost of living and you know that people are struggling now, why would you not just rule out that worry and say we're not going to do that tax rise? We know over the year your petrol cost is going to be high, even if petrol comes down.
On the principle, the idea that you step in as soon as prices go up, I mean, that could mean stepping in a lot, the government, couldn't it, on all sorts of things, in all sorts of areas.
So there's a question of like whether you do subsidy, whether you do all of those different things. I think this is a different point because it's the first time that fuel duty would rise in 15 years. Okay. So that's why I think it's a different point. You could take away that tax rise worry now if you wanted to.
But when we came to office in 24, though, the Tory freeze on fuel duty was coming to an end. So you were going to rise it. Your plan was to...
It never did. Let's be clear. Fuel duty hasn't risen for 15 years.
But your plan was to... If you won the election, your plan was that fuel duty would have gone up. We froze it when we won the office.
I think everybody in politics knows fuel duty was always meant to rise every year and then it was always frozen every year. It was frozen for 15 years. And again, let's just take the party politics out of it. There are people now who are struggling, who are paying higher prices. You could alleviate their worries.
But you could also say you don't need to worry about this at the moment because
I think we're
fuel
slightly
duty
going around
is
in
frozen.
circles here. So I'm going to bring
in
Nick and move on to the other topic that was talked about a lot, which was, of course, about what's going on in the Middle East and what Keir Starmer seemed to want to talk about, which was the Conservative position. Really, I think what he was talking about was whether the UK should have joined the initial bombing of Iran alongside Israel and America.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Prime Minister clearly thinks he's in the right place on this. For all the criticism he's had over the past week, government is confident that it's in the same place as the rest of the country. And it was interesting that on a day where we might be talking about the Prime Minister's judgment in the context of the Mandelson files later, he was quite keen to talk up his judgment on this. But yes, Claire, I mean, there is a question, isn't there? Because, I mean, I read out the quote there, I can do it again. Kemi Badenoch said in the Commons last week that the US has taken offensive action to destroy missile launch sites to defend British troops. So she's talking about RAF planes going into Iran and bombing sites. Yesterday, she told the BBC that she'd never said she wanted to get involved in the war. So which is it?
Firstly, I think there is a difference in us asking questions about why we're not joining the offensive. That is our job in opposition, to hold the government to account, to ask those questions. When anyone asked us what we would do, we always said we think the US should use our bases. That was the position that we said we would have done this.
Hold on, she said last week, why is the Prime Minister not allowing the RAF to do the same?
No,
Are you saying she didn't?
So my point is there's a difference between her asking questions, saying, please, can you set out your thinking? But when we talked about in interviews, and, you can look at our Defence Minister and Kemi, what she said, we were very clear that we thought we should have allowed the US to use our bases much earlier than they do.
She thinks that the UK, the RAF, should take part in those strikes on Iran, on those missile bases.
Well, look, there's a difference in asking questions, saying, why have we not done X, Y and Z, and then setting out what your position is. And the position that we had...
Why would the Prime Minister not allow the RAF to do the same?
But I think we should be allowed to ask questions. But we should be allowed to ask questions. If you asked us, what we thought should have happened was that the US should have been allowed to use our bases earlier rather than later. And if I could just make this point about the Prime Minister's judgment, which he's feeling obviously quite cock-a-hoop about, if you read the behind the scenes, he actually wanted the US to use the bases earlier and was not allowed to by the rest of his cabinet. It was actually not his decision. it was the Chancellor. It was Ed Miliband. It wasn't his choice.
No, I think the Prime Minister's been very clear that we weren't going to be joining the US-Israeli strikes. And for me, as a Defence Minister, I take my responsibilities very seriously. We currently, today, have RAF pilots, British Armed Forces personnel, not just in Cyprus, but across the Middle East, supporting defensive operations in support of British citizens, British bases and British allies. At this very moment, I would want all of us to be focused on the most important focus of keeping them safe, keeping our allies safe. And that's why the decision about whether to commit your forces to military action is one of the most serious decisions any Prime Minister can make.
But what about preparing for that? Because the UK did know in advance. I mean, we could all see the build-up, couldn't we, that was going on in the Middle East. And there has been criticism about not sending the destroyer, which HMS Dragon, which is now has left, I think, Portsmouth. We can see pictures of it here. Why wasn't that vessel sent before?
No, we've been very clear that we had forces pre-positioning from January onwards. So we deployed additional RAF Typhoons to Cyprus. We pulled forward 12 Squadron, our joint squadron with Qatar, to be in Qatar ready to defend our allies there. We pre-positioned F-35B fighter jets in Cyprus. We deployed radar, counter-drones teams and additional capabilities ahead of any strikes. And what we've done since there, because of the reckless and indiscriminate attacks that Iran has launched in response to the US strikes, we've reviewed that, we've kept it under review, and we've agreed with the military advice that has been given to us as ministers, the Chief of Defence Staff recommending that HMS Dragon sails. The incredible...
So they hadn't recommended that before, is that what you're saying?
No, and HMS Dragon was due to go into refit, and the heroic effort of the Royal Navy personnel and the civilians in Portsmouth to turn that ship around, which should have taken 6 weeks, they did in a matter of days, to sail her fully armed and ready for action in the Middle East, I think has shown that when the military advice came to us on Tuesday, it was signed off by defence ministers the very same day.
And just quickly, why no aircraft carrier? Because the French obviously have sent an aircraft carrier, haven't they? Why didn't we do that?
So the aircraft carrier is also preparing for its deployment in the North Atlantic. So the important thing at the moment is we're not only facing events in the Middle East, we also have persistent Russian aggression in the North Atlantic and the North Sea, the high North.
This is the French aircraft carrier, by the way.
Yeah, so what the HMS Prince of Wales is readying for deployment and Operation Firecrest in the North Atlantic, something that indeed the opposition were calling for additional resources for only a few weeks ago. So we are preparing to not only keep the UK and our allies safe in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, but also in the North Atlantic, because Russian aggression against ourselves and our allies continues during this period. The tension there is real. So therefore, we have a responsibility to make sure as a nation that we're defending British citizens, bases and allies in all theatres. And that's exactly what we're doing.
To that point, do you think that the armed services are spread too thinly, given what's going on?
Well, I think there are questions about what happened here, because this was the first time there wasn't a naval warship in the Middle East for decades when tensions were clearly rising. And if you take a step back, Labour have been in power for almost 2 years now, and in that time they haven't set out that increase in defence spending, which is clearly needed because the world has got more dangerous.
We've increased defence spending. We've brought forward the spend
we have set
to
out
2.5% by April 27, 3 years earlier than you were planning. So we have set out the increase.
Well, hang on a second, let me finish. I think there are choices that the Labour Party have made, which is to spend a lot more on welfare and not get to 3% on defence spending. We've set out plans.
But your government's never got to that. I mean, there has been criticism of the amount that you spent on the armed forces.
So this is a wider point, which is that the world has got more dangerous. We clearly are going to have to spend more on defence than we did before. I think everyone around the world has seen that. And instead of increasing defence spending to 3%, which is where I believe it should be, and we've set out fully costed plans to get that done by the end of this Parliament, I'm not saying that's easy. You have to make hard choices, but it's not a choice the Labour Party has made. And a second problem that I think we've got as a country, again, considering that geopolitical risk has gone up, is that our energy is less secure. The Labour Party are shutting down the North Sea, which is making us more reliant on imports, and our industrial capacity is less secure. And our industrial capacity in a wartime situation is our hard power. I went to a refinery last week in Wales. They are being crippled by carbon taxes, as is our ability to produce ammonia, for example, which we would need in explosives.
Okay,
so all of those hard power questions...
There's quite a lot.
All of those hard power questions, I think, are being failed by the Labour Party right now, and they need to get a grip on this because the world is getting more
scary.
scary.
Firstly, just on defence spending, you do have a long-term ambition of 3 or 3.5% of GDP, which is economic output, to be spent on defence. I mean, how are you going to get to that?
That's right.
It's quite a vague plan, isn't it?
No, we've said that very clearly. So there's an extra £5 billion in the defence budget this year, thanks to decisions we've taken. We've ended the era of hollowing out and underfunding that we saw from the Conservatives. And in fact, it was a Conservative defence secretary in the Commons that said they had hollowed out and underfunded defence.
That was all politicians of various parties. But the point is you're going to have to spend more now.
You cut defence when you were in government.
You also left a £40 billion hole. But the point is now, looking forward, you could be spending 3%.
Well, let me
try and answer this question, because it's really important, because I understand why you don't want to go into the facts that you cut defence when you came into office, you underfunded, you presided over a retention and recruitment crisis. What we're trying to do is restore our armed forces, rearm and prepare for warfighting readiness against a peer adversary such as Russia. That's why we've given our troops the biggest pay rise in 20 years. That's why we've set out to increase defence spending, not just in the budget this year, where we've got extra budget, extra money paying for additional capabilities, but we're setting out where we'll increase it to 2.5% of GDP by April 2027, 3 years earlier than anyone expected. We'll move to 3% in the next Parliament, and we'll hit the NATO standard for all NATO nations of 3.5% in 2035. Now, as part of that, we're buying new equipment. We're retiring old equipment that should have been retired under the last government but never was. And we're buying new capabilities, learning the lessons from Ukraine, but importantly, protecting our people as well. That's why we're investing £9 billion in defence housing.
Take the action that your Tory governments didn't take.
Well, so frankly, there was a long period of time when geopolitical risk was much lower, right? So around the world, people were spending less on defence, and that happened after the Cold War. The world has changed. We've seen a huge amount of risk, not just in the Middle East. You've got the tension between the US and China. You've got Russia, Iran and North Korea. Geopolitics has fundamentally changed in the last 6 years. And the question that I would ask is, Luke wants to throw out all of these sort of political attacks about 10 years ago. Why are you not spending 3% by the end of this Parliament? I think even you in your heart, Luke, know that that is needed.
Right, Luke,
and actually there are choices that you could make. I'm sure that you would say that. I'm sure you speak to people in armed forces all the time, and you know that 3% is needed.
You said
absolutely do. The people in armed forces can see a rising defence budget. In fact, there's not a single person...
I bet you spend time arguing in government to go 3% in this Parliament.
There's not a single person in the armed forces serving in any rank in uniform today who has served with a decade of rising defence spending ahead of them. The military today have that. What we have to do is spend it better than we've had in the past. Procurement programmes that were over budget. There's 49 major defence procurement programmes in the Ministry of Defence. 47 of them were over budget and delayed at the point of the general election. We've got to get our procurement back on track, which is what we're doing, making reforms to get there. We've got to address the recruitment crisis, and we have done so with more investment in housing and in pay. And we've got to make sure that we're giving our fighting forces the equipment they need, which is why we're investing in new technologies.
Are we building the right equipment? Are we developing drones, for example? That seems to be where this is going. You can see it happening in Ukraine. You can see what's going on in Iran. Are we at the cutting edge of that kind of development?
Yes, we absolutely are. So because we are Ukraine's #1 ally in this respect, we've been using their battlefield expertise and our advanced manufacturing techniques to build those together. I opened a drone factory in Suffolk a couple of weeks ago. That's from a Ukrainian company. We're building the drones, and not just the drones, though, because the issue in the Middle East is about air defence. And what we need is layered air defence. It sounds a bit technical, but what that means is we need Typhoons and F-35s to take out certain types of threats. We need missiles to take out others. And we're bringing drones and, importantly, the sign-off of the new directed energy weapons, the laser systems that we're developing to have layered air defence. Now, that's what our allies are looking for British expertise on. That's why I am proud that the response we've seen in the Middle East and the Mediterranean isn't just the brave fighting forces, but they're the industry response as well.
The Conservative policy is to reduce the welfare bill and put some of it at least into the defence budget. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I don't agree with pushing kids into poverty. Okay. And so in my constituency in Plymouth, getting rid of the 2-child limit lifts thousands of children out of poverty. Now, I believe in the British values of decency and everyone being able to achieve their opportunity. Pushing kids into poverty, I think, is the opposite of that.
OK. Nick, can we just end by looking ahead to later today? And that is the release of a batch of files. It's all about Peter Mandelson and his appointment as the US ambassador. And really, it's about what the Prime Minister knew at the time of that appointment about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, who was, of course, a convicted paedophile. What can we expect from this?
We had hoped to have them by now, but it's all been delayed by urgent questions in Parliament. So it's probably going to be about 2:30 that we see these files. There will be a lot of them. We're told that it's a chunky document that's going to drop with all these exchanges about Lord Mandelson's appointment as US ambassador. And fundamentally, I think the question is going to be, does it show what Keir Starmer claimed, that Lord Mandelson repeatedly lied about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein when he claimed that he hardly knew him, as the Prime Minister put it. Lord Mandelson's position has always been that he answered the questions that he was asked in that vetting process truthfully. We'll get some of that this afternoon. I'm not sure if we'll have a complete picture because there's some stuff that's not being released because the Met have asked the government not to publish it. There's some stuff that we're not going to get until in a few weeks' time when the second batch comes. But we will get a look behind the curtain this afternoon into how that decision was made and perhaps a bit more about what the Prime Minister's judgment was like.
Yeah, Luke, there's questions about the Prime Minister's judgment on this, aren't there?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's been very upfront and honest about this. He got the appointment of Peter Mandelson wrong and he's apologised for it. And what I want to see from a leader, not just in terms of making the right decisions about war that we've just discussed, but when mistakes are made, that they're fronted up and owned. And that's what the Prime Minister's done here. And now we're putting in place the improvements and vetting that's necessary and, importantly, dealing with the misogyny that we can see with the Epstein people associated with him to make sure that we're in a better place as a result of this terrible, terrible situation. OK,
thank you to all my guests. That is all for today. I will be back tomorrow with more Politics Live, and that will be at 12:15 here on BBC Two and on iPlayer.